I am begging you to read fantasy books. But why read fantasy books? I mean, seriously, we can read books about neuroscience, black holes, psychology, philosophy, and so many other fascinating subjects that are real. Something that you can directly apply to your life. So why waste your time reading about some completely made up character named Rand al'Thor or Frodo Baggins? Frodo Baggins isn't even like a real human, it's like a humanoid. How can that possibly be productive to read something that's fantasy? Why read something that is not only fictional, but like as fictional as you can get? Also, side note, the pop science books that you guys read that are hundreds of pages long can be summed up in a chapter in a textbook with much better detail. But that's besides the point. So let's talk about it. Why should you read fantasy books? Well, some of the best wisdom and truth comes from fictional work. More often than not, the writer is reflecting from their own experiences and it's kind of bleeding into their work. For example, I don't know if you've read The Idiot by Dostoevsky, but there's a passage that we'll read later that talks about how important it is to not take life for granted. This was not just like a random passage within the story. It had a lot of meaning, and that is because Dostoevsky was nearly executed himself. Briefly stated, Dostoevsky became affiliated with an intellectual circle named the Petrashevsky Circle. You know, I don't speak Russian. But anyways, this group openly challenged serfdom, autocracy, socialism, and frequently read banned works. So the current Tsar at the time, Tsar Nicholas I, staged a mock execution for any political dissidents. Among those condemned was a young man named Dostoevsky. Now, the people in the crowd in the mock execution group, they had no idea that this was, staged. They were deliberately kept ignorant. So just minutes before Dostoevsky's scheduled execution, his sentence was commuted to a 4-year, basically a forced labor camp in Siberia. But up until those couple minutes, he seriously thought he was going to die. And that had a profound impact on his writing. And we can specifically see how this had an impact on his writing. If you're going to read any Dostoevsky or basically any Russian writer, always try to get the Richard Pevear and Larissa Volkahansky translation. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but they are fantastic translators. Really gets that beauty across that was originally there. Anyways, the protagonist of the book, Prince Mishkin, was recounting a story from his travels about a man who was about to get publicly executed. This man has once been led to a scaffold along with others, and a sentence of death by firing squad was read out to him for a political crime. That is literally word for word what happened to Dostoevsky in real life. After about 20 minutes, a pardon was read out to him and he was given a lesser degree of punishment. Nevertheless, for the space between two sentences, for 20 minutes or a quarter of an hour at least, he lived under the certain conviction that in a few minutes he would suddenly die. He remembered everything with extraordinary clarity and used to say he would never forget anything from those minutes. And then the person that was about to be executed, he's thinking to himself in his mind, what if I were to not die? What if life were given back to me? What infinity? And it would all be mine. Then I'd turn each minute into a whole age. I'd lose nothing. I'd reckon up every minute separately. I'd let nothing be wasted. And that's kind of like the whole point, is not taking life for granted. And it's funny because he does not completely follow through with this. We all take life for granted. That feeling of really being reminded that life is temporary, that eventually went away. And that actually happened with Dostoevsky in real life too. I mean, that's why he wrote about it. Anyways, all this to say that in fictional works, the author is reflecting on life experiences, making the lesson real. And not only is it real, the life lessons that the author is communicating from their own life, they have complete control over the environment. They have control over the diction, the environment, the setting. So when they have all these variables under control, it makes the lesson so much more important rather than being befuddled with all this other stuff that usually doesn't happen in real life. Everything that the author is writing is leading up exactly to that moment, making it so much more impactful. These are not just stories, they're parables based on real life experiences. Teaching lessons through parables is nothing new. Jesus did this. And Christianity is the most popular religion globally. So these parables, they have a tremendous impact. And having the truth being made more impactful makes it more impactful. Now let's talk about imagination from fantasy books. You gain the imagination that's comparable to a child's. And I should also emphasize when you read fantasy books that you really take the time to read them. You're pausing at the commas. You're setting the rhythm. You're imagining the scenes in your head. You're giving voices to each separate character. Reading this way really helps you to be enveloped in the story that is being written. There reaches a point when you're in like a flow state and there's a movie playing within your mind. When you take the time to imagine all these beautiful scenes that the author has imagined and written, the chains that once held down your imagination are gone. And once these chains are broken, you seriously have some potential to not really ever be bored again. Now, this is gonna sound cringe because like I am a grown man, but I really do this. Ever since reading these types of books, I just use my imagination constantly. For example, like when I'm driving my car, I literally imagine my car as a chariot being pulled by horses. Yeah, I know that is ridiculous to say, but it's way cooler than just driving a regular car. My boredom is gone. When I prepare for physics exams, I imagine that I'm Gandalf. All this is childlike in nature, of course, but whose imagination is stronger than a child's? I actually wrote about all that in my university applications, so hopefully I don't regret that. But you can apply this sort of thinking to anything. With reading fantasy, your lanes of thinking have broadened, they've expanded, they've multiplied in number. There are more paths to take, different ways to achieve the same goal. I mean, like, do you really realize how important it is to be able to think outside the box? How much companies will pay you for a unique and important perspective? Reading fantasy is seriously like a supplement for the brain. And gaining this type of imagination is liberating. Your mind is no longer an enclosure. It's a place that possesses no dimensions and is infinite in every direction. And also, if you're like the type of person that doesn't read at all, like this is especially for you. Because when you first start reading again and like it's late night and maybe it's raining outside and you're all snuggled up and you're reading this fantasy book, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in 4th grade again. It's a magnificent feeling, connecting and healing with your inner child. Okay, so we have that, but additionally, reading fantasy books is really good for reconnecting with your inner masculinity or femininity. I mean, we have all the hero tropes for male and female characters. Those characters often possess traits that we want to have in our lives. Courage, intellectual ability, empathy, patience, you name it. These are traits that we sometimes desire to have within our own character. I mean, consistently, I remind myself of the heroes I look up to. I need to be like them. I need to be courageous. I need to be brave, just like them. I want to be brave like how Frodo was when he escorted the ring to Mordor to save the world. I want to be strong and stoic and calm like Lan in the World of Time. I want that calm serenity that is ever present in Aes Sedai. Anyways, any heroic traits that I personally identify with, I emulate within my life. And last but not least, reading fantasy books is just fun. To be free of the world where we have to constantly obey the laws of physics. To be free from the world where we have to work to eat. Now to be absorbed in a world where your imagination can run free. And most of all, the most important thing, to gain back the imagination you once had as a child.